The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse as Harrison Blackstone stood frozen, watching the woman he'd fallen desperately in love with pack her belongings into a single suitcase. His hands trembled as he gripped the marble countertop, his knuckles white with the effort of holding himself together. "Simone, please," his voice cracked. "Please don't make me learn to live without you. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our royal story family. Your throne in this kingdom of stories is waiting for you." These passionate journeys of hearts colliding against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful souls just like you. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately a new story drops. Hello once again, my beautiful royal story family. I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a bustling city feeling the energy of millions of dreams, or in a quiet village where stars shine brighter than streetlights, drop your location in the comments below. Our royal family spans the globe, and knowing you're out there makes every story feel like a conversation between friends. The first time Harrison Blackstone laid eyes on Simone Parker, she was demolishing his business proposal with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a woman who refused to accept mediocrity. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and Harrison had called the meeting expecting a routine discussion about marketing strategies for his tech empire's latest acquisition. What he got instead was a 5'7" force of nature who challenged every assumption he'd made about the project and about himself. "Mr. Blackstone," Simone said, her warm brown eyes flashing with intelligence as she leaned forward across the conference table. "With all due respect, this approach is exactly why brilliant companies fail. You're thinking like a CEO who's forgotten what it feels like to be a customer." Harrison felt something shift in his chest, a strange combination of irritation and fascination. At 34, he'd built his empire by surrounding himself with people who executed his vision, not questioned it. His 6'3" frame commanded attention in every room he entered, his sharp blue eyes and perfectly styled blonde hair completing the image of a man who was used to getting his way. But this woman, with her natural beauty and fearless confidence, was looking at him like he was just another person who could be wrong. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice carrying that edge of authority that usually made people backtrack, "I've successfully launched 17 companies in the past 5 years. I think I understand something about connecting with customers." Simone smiled, and Harrison felt his breath catch. It wasn't a submissive smile or even a polite one. It was the smile of a woman who was about to prove her point. "Then explain to me," she said, sliding a tablet across the table, "why your customer retention rate drops by 30% within the first 6 months of every launch." The silence in the conference room was deafening. Harrison stared at the data on the screen, his business instincts warring with something else, something that felt suspiciously like attraction to this woman who dared to challenge him. Around the table, his executives shifted uncomfortably, waiting to see how their notoriously controlled CEO would handle being corrected by an outside consultant. "You've done your homework," Harrison said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I always do." Simone leaned back in her chair, and Harrison caught a hint of her perfume, something sophisticated and warm that made him want to lean closer. "The question is, Mr. Blackstone, are you interested in being right, or are you interested in being successful?" That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. Harrison stood up, ostensibly to get a better look at her presentation, but really because the controlled environment of the conference room suddenly felt too small to contain whatever was happening between them. As he moved around the table, Simone stood as well, reaching for the same document he was going for. Their hands touched. It was nothing, the briefest brush of fingertips as they both reached for the same folder. But Harrison felt electricity shoot up his arm, and when he looked into Simone's eyes, he saw his own surprise reflected back at him. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, they stood frozen, neither moving away, both acutely aware of the sudden charged atmosphere in the room. Simone started to speak, but her voice came out breathless. "The data is compelling," Harrison said, his own voice rougher than usual. He was standing close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to notice the way her breathing had quickened slightly. "Yes," she whispered, though Harrison wasn't entirely sure she was talking about the business proposal anymore. They stepped back simultaneously, both shaken by the unexpected intensity of the moment. Harrison cleared his throat and returned to his seat, trying to ignore the way his heart was racing. Simone smoothed her skirt and opened her laptop, her professional composure intact despite the flush in her cheeks. "As I was saying," she continued, her voice steadier now, "customer retention improves dramatically when you focus on emotional connection rather than just functional benefits." Harrison nodded, though he was having trouble focusing on her words when he was so distracted by the way her lips moved when she spoke. "And you believe this approach would work for our new platform?" "I believe," Simone said, meeting his eyes directly, "that people don't buy products. They buy feelings. They buy the promise of becoming someone better, someone more successful, someone more fulfilled." "And what feeling does our platform promise?" Harrison asked, genuinely curious now. Simone smiled again, and this time Harrison noticed the way it transformed her entire face. "Connection," she said simply. "In a world where everyone is more connected than ever, but lonelier than ever, your platform promises genuine human connection. But your current marketing treats it like just another business tool." Harrison stared at her, something clicking into place in his mind. She was right, of course. More than right. She was brilliant. And sitting across from her, watching her passionate explanation of human psychology and market dynamics, he realized he was in trouble. This wasn't just professional admiration. This was attraction, pure and simple, to a woman who was clearly as intelligent as she was beautiful. What Harrison didn't know was that Simone Parker was experiencing the exact same internal upheaval. She'd taken this consulting job as part of a carefully orchestrated plan, a way to get close to Harrison Blackstone's business operations and understand his competitive strategies. Her father, Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford Media and Harrison's biggest business rival, had tasked her with gathering intelligence that could be used to undermine Harrison's market position. But sitting across from Harrison, watching the way his eyes lit up when he understood a complex concept, seeing the genuine respect he showed for her insights despite his obvious alpha personality, Simone felt her carefully constructed professional detachment beginning to crumble. This wasn't the ruthless corporate shark her father had described. This was a man who listened, who challenged her thinking, who made her feel intellectually stimulated in ways she hadn't experienced in years. "I'd like to hire you," Harrison said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "I'm not looking for a permanent position," Simone replied quickly, something flickering in her eyes that Harrison couldn't quite read. The truth was, she couldn't take a permanent position. Her deception would be exposed too quickly in daily close contact. "Contract work, then?" 6 months, you redesign our entire customer experience strategy." Simone hesitated, and Harrison found himself holding his breath. There was something in her expression, a conflict he didn't understand. Part of her wanted to say yes, not just for the mission her father had given her, but because the thought of working closely with Harrison Blackstone was more appealing than it should be. The other part of her was terrified of what might happen if she spent 6 months in close proximity to a man who was already making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. 6 months, she agreed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out of the conference room, Harrison found himself lingering, not quite ready to let Simone disappear back into whatever life she'd come from. "Miss Parker?" he called as she gathered her materials. "Simone?" she corrected, looking up at him. "Simone," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting 6 months." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "Mr. Blackstone," she said finally, "I think you have no idea. Have you ever felt that instant, undeniable attraction to someone you knew you shouldn't want? That moment when professional boundaries blur and you realize you're in completely uncharted territory? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most unexpected connections become the most transformative. If Harrison had known then what he knew now, that Simone Parker wasn't even her real name, that she was hiding a secret that could bring down everything he'd worked for, that he was about to fall in love with the one woman who could destroy him, would he have made the same choice? Would he have invited her into his world, into his business, and eventually into his heart? But in that moment, standing in his conference room watching her walk away, all Harrison knew was that something had awakened in him. Something he'd thought died years ago when he'd learned that business was safer than emotion, that control was better than vulnerability. Watching Simone Parker disappear through the conference room doors, Harrison Blackstone had no idea he was about to discover that some forces were too powerful to control, and some women were worth risking everything for. What he also didn't know was that across town, in the executive offices of Ashford Media, Richard Ashford was receiving a very different kind of report about the same meeting. "She made contact," David Chang reported, sliding a folder across Richard's mahogany desk. "The consultation went exactly as planned." Blackstone took the bait completely. Richard Ashford leaned back in his leather chair, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. At 62, he was a man who'd built his media empire through careful strategy and ruthless execution. Harrison Blackstone had been stealing market share from Ashford Media for 2 years, and Richard had finally found the perfect weapon to bring him down, his own brilliant daughter, though she didn't fully understand the scope of what she was being asked to do. And Simone, how did she handle the initial contact? David hesitated. She seemed engaged with the project, very focused on the business strategy discussions. What David didn't tell Richard was that he'd noticed something in Simone's demeanor when she talked about Harrison Blackstone, a spark of genuine interest that had nothing to do with corporate espionage and everything to do with a woman who'd just met a man who challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. "Excellent," Richard said, already planning his next move. "Phase 1 is complete. Now we move to Phase 2. Meanwhile, in her downtown apartment, Simone sat at her kitchen table staring at the contract Harrison had offered her, her mind racing with possibilities and complications she hadn't foreseen. The plan had been simple: get close to Harrison Blackstone, understand his business model from the inside, and report back to her father with information that could be used to outmaneuver him in the marketplace. But the plan hadn't accounted for the way Harrison's eyes had lit up when she'd challenged his assumptions. It hadn't prepared her for the electric moment when their hands had touched, or the way her heart had raced when he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. Simone picked up her phone to call her father and report on the meeting's success, then set it down again without dialing. For the first time in her life, she was questioning whether following Richard Ashford's strategic plans was worth the price she might have to pay. What she didn't know was that the price would be higher than she could ever imagine, and that falling in love with Harrison Blackstone would force her to choose between the family that had raised her and the man who was about to become the center of her universe. 3 weeks into her contract with Harrison's company, Simone was beginning to understand what she'd gotten herself into. Working with Harrison was unlike anything she'd experienced in her consulting career. He was brilliant, passionate, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to excellence. He was also driving her slowly out of her mind with desire. It wasn't just his intelligence, though watching him dissect market data and consumer psychology with surgical precision was admittedly fascinating. It wasn't just his presence, though Harrison commanded every room he entered with an authority that made her pulse quicken. It was the way he listened to her. Really listened, as if her opinions mattered more than his own considerable ego. "These focus group results don't make sense," Harrison said, leaning over her shoulder to examine the reports spread across her desk. The warmth of his body so close to hers made Simone's concentration scatter like leaves in the wind. "What doesn't make sense about them?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the fact that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to turn around and bury her face in his neck. "Look at the demographic breakdown," Harrison said, his finger tracing across the data, his hand accidentally brushing against hers. Both of them froze at the contact, the air between them suddenly charged with electricity. The same people who say they want simplicity are asking for more features. It's contradictory. Simone forced herself to focus on the numbers rather than the way Harrison's breath felt warm against her ear. It's not contradictory, she said, her voice coming out huskier than she'd intended. They want simplicity in design, but depth in functionality. They want something that looks effortless but does everything they need. Harrison straightened up, putting some distance between them, but Simone could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Like what? Like a swan, Simone said, turning to face him fully. Elegant and serene on the surface, but underneath, working incredibly hard to stay afloat. Harrison stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Is that what you are, Simone? A swan? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address. Simone felt her heart begin to race, not just from attraction, but from the dangerous territory they were approaching. If only he knew how accurate his metaphor was, how much effort it took for her to maintain her serene professional facade, while her entire mission was falling apart beneath the surface. I think, Simone said carefully, that we're all working harder than we appear to be. Before Harrison could respond, his assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Blackstone, your lawyer is here about the Morrison inheritance matter. Harrison's expression immediately shifted, professional mask sliding back into place. Send him in, he said, then looked at Simone with what might have been regret. We'll have to continue this later. As the lawyer entered, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a serious expression, Simone began gathering her materials to leave, but Harrison's voice stopped her. Actually, Miss Parker, you should probably stay for this. It might affect our working relationship. Simone settled back into her chair, curious despite herself. The lawyer, who Harrison introduced as James Morrison, opened his briefcase with the gravity of a man about to deliver life-changing news. Harrison, James said, I've reviewed your grandfather's will again, and I'm afraid the marriage clause is ironclad. If you're not married by your 35th birthday, the company's shares revert to the Morrison Foundation. Harrison ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. That's in 8 months, James. 8 months. I understand the timeline is challenging, James replied gently. But your grandfather was very specific. He believed that a man needed the stability of marriage to properly run a family business. Simone watched this exchange with growing understanding and alarm. Harrison needed to be married to maintain control of his company, and his 35th birthday was rapidly approaching. The implications were staggering, and suddenly, her own situation became infinitely more complicated. There has to be another way, Harrison said, beginning to pace. I'm afraid not, James replied, unless you can find someone willing to enter into a marriage arrangement quickly. A business arrangement, Harrison said slowly, the wheels clearly turning in his mind. James nodded carefully. It would need to be a legal marriage, but the emotional component could be whatever you both agreed upon. After James left, Harrison stood at his office windows, staring out at the city below. Simone remained in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities she shouldn't be considering. Simone, Harrison said without turning around, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know there's absolutely no pressure. Your job isn't dependent on your answer. What is it? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. Harrison turned to face her, his expression serious and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I need a wife, not a real wife, not someone who wants romance or forever. I need a business partner who can help me keep my company and who needs something in return that I can provide. Simone's heart hammered against her ribs. This was more than she could have hoped for in terms of access to Harrison's business operations. A marriage arrangement would give her unprecedented insight into his strategies, his plans, his vulnerabilities. Her father would be thrilled. So why did the thought of a fake marriage to Harrison Blackstone make her feel like she was about to betray something precious? What would you need in return? Harrison continued. Money? Business connections? Stock options? Name it. Simone thought about her own situation, her trust fund that required marriage to access, her father's constant pressure to settle down, her need for financial independence that marriage would provide. It was perfect, too perfect. She started, then stopped. Harrison, this is a lot to process. I know, he said, moving closer to her. And I know it sounds crazy. But Simone, we work well together. We understand each other professionally. We could make this work without complicating it with emotions or expectations. If only he knew that emotions were already involved, at least on her side. If only he knew that the woman he was proposing a marriage of convenience to was falling for him more each day. If only he knew that agreeing to this arrangement would put them both in more danger than either of them could imagine. I have my own trust fund situation, Simone said finally, the words coming out before she could stop them. I need to be married by my 30th birthday to access my inheritance. It was true, though she left out the part about her inheritance being Ashford Media stock worth $50 million, and her 30th birthday being in just over a year. Harrison's eyes lit up with something that looked like relief. So we both need the same thing. A marriage of convenience, Simone said, testing the words. Exactly. 1 year, purely business, no emotional complications. Harrison moved closer to her, and Simone caught her breath at the intensity in his eyes. What do you say, Simone Parker? Will you marry me? The proposal should have felt clinical, businesslike, exactly what it was supposed to be. Instead, hearing Harrison ask her to marry him, even under these circumstances, made Simone's heart soar and break simultaneously. She was about to say yes to marrying the man she was falling in love with, while lying to him about everything that mattered. Yes, she whispered, sealing both their fates. 2 weeks later, Simone stood in the law offices of Morrison & Associates, reviewing the marriage contract that would legally bind her to Harrison Blackstone for the next 12 months. The document was comprehensive, covering everything from living arrangements to public appearances to the dissolution process that would occur at the contract's end. Separate bedrooms, Harrison was saying to James Morrison, his tone brisk and professional. Complete financial independence. No joint accounts, no shared assets beyond what's necessary for appearances. And public appearances? James asked, taking notes. Whatever social and business functions require a couple's presence, Harrison replied. We'll need to be convincing as a married couple in public settings. Simone tried to focus on the legal language, but her attention kept drifting to Harrison's hands as he flipped through the contract pages. Strong, capable hands that she was trying not to imagine touching her skin. This was supposed to be purely business, she reminded herself. She was here to gather information for her father, and Harrison was here to secure his inheritance. The fact that she found him increasingly irresistible was a complication she couldn't afford. Living arrangements are straightforward, James continued. Miss Parker will move into Mr. Blackstone's penthouse. Separate bedrooms, as specified, but shared common areas for the sake of any staff or visitors who might question the arrangement. And what about personal relationships? Simone asked, surprised by her own boldness in bringing up the topic. Harrison looked at her sharply. Personal relationships? I mean, Simone said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, we're both adults. This is a year-long arrangement. What if one of us wants to see other people? The silence that followed her question stretched uncomfortably long. Harrison's expression had gone carefully neutral, but Simone caught something flickering in his eyes that looked like possessiveness. I think, Harrison said finally, his voice measured, that for the sake of maintaining the illusion, we should probably avoid outside romantic entanglements during the contract period. Agreed, Simone said quickly, though she couldn't ignore the relief she felt at his words. Excellent, James said, making another note. I think we've covered all the major points. The ceremony will be small, as requested. Just the two of you, myself as officiant, and 2 witnesses. Very straightforward. As they signed the documents that would make them husband and wife, Simone felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump without knowing how far she would fall. Harrison's signature next to hers looked strong and decisive, while her own seemed to tremble slightly on the page. Congratulations, James said warmly as they finished the paperwork. I'll see you both at the courthouse Friday morning." Walking out of the law office together, Simone and Harrison maintained careful distance between them, both seemingly processing the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to. "Second thoughts?" Harrison asked as they waited for the elevator. "Are you having second thoughts?" Simone countered. Harrison looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm thinking that this is either the smartest business decision I've ever made or the most dangerous." "Why dangerous?" Simone asked, though she feared she already knew. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside together. In the confined space, Harrison seemed larger, more present, his proximity making Simone's pulse quicken. "Because," Harrison said, his voice lower than usual, "I'm realizing that keeping this purely business might be more challenging than I anticipated." The elevator reached the ground floor, but neither of them moved to exit immediately. They stood facing each other, the weight of confession hanging between them. "Harrison," Simone said softly, "we can't." "I know," he interrupted. "I know we can't. That's what makes it dangerous." As they finally left the elevator and walked out onto the busy street, both Harrison and Simone were acutely aware that they'd just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. In 3 days, they would be married. In 3 days, Simone would be living in Harrison's penthouse, sharing his life, pretending to be his wife while hiding the secret that could destroy him. And both of them were beginning to realize that the biggest threat to their carefully planned arrangement wasn't the legal complications or public scrutiny. It was the growing attraction between them that was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, Simone sat in her apartment, staring at her phone as it rang for the 3rd time. Her father's name flashed on the screen, and she knew she couldn't avoid the call any longer. "Simone?" Richard Ashford's voice came through the phone, warm but with an underlying edge. "I've been trying to reach you for days. How is the Blackstone project progressing?" "It's going well," Simone said carefully. "I'm gaining access to his business strategies, understanding his market approach." "Excellent. And have you been able to identify any vulnerabilities we can exploit?" Simone closed her eyes, Harrison's face appearing in her mind. The way he'd looked at her when he'd asked her to marry him, vulnerable and trusting and completely unaware that she was deceiving him. "I'm still gathering information," she said. "Well, gather faster," Richard's tone sharpened. "Blackstone's latest product launch is cutting into our revenue projections. I need actionable intelligence, Simone, not progress reports." "Dad," Simone said, the word coming out more strained than she'd intended. "What is it?" Simone opened her mouth to tell him about the marriage contract, about the unprecedented access she was about to gain to Harrison's life and business. But something held her back, a growing reluctance to share the intimate details of her arrangement with Harrison. "Nothing," she said finally. "I'll have more detailed information for you soon." After ending the call, Simone sat in the dark of her apartment, wrestling with emotions she didn't want to name. In 3 days, she would marry Harrison Blackstone. The plan had been simple: get close to him, understand his weaknesses, help her father destroy his business empire. But plans, Simone was learning, had a way of changing when human hearts got involved. And her heart was becoming dangerously invested in protecting the man she was supposed to be betraying. The wedding ceremony itself was exactly as businesslike as they'd planned. Friday morning at 10 a.m., Simone met Harrison at the courthouse steps, both of them dressed in understated professional attire that suggested importance without fanfare. Harrison wore a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his blue eyes look almost silver in the morning light. Simone had chosen a knee-length ivory dress that was elegant without being bridal, though she'd caught Harrison's appreciative glance when they'd first seen each other. "Ready for this?" Harrison asked as they climbed the courthouse steps together. "As ready as anyone can be for a fake marriage," Simone replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. "Is that what we're calling it? A fake marriage?" Simone looked at him sharply. "Isn't it?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose that depends on how you define real." Before Simone could ask what he meant, James Morrison appeared with the 2 witnesses he'd arranged, his assistant and a court clerk who specialized in these kinds of arrangements. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes, but every second felt weighted with significance Simone hadn't anticipated. Do you, Harrison Blackstone, take Simone Parker to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Harrison said, his voice steady and sure as he looked directly into Simone's eyes. Do you, Simone Parker, take Harrison Blackstone to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Simone whispered, the words feeling both like the truth and the biggest lie she'd ever told. When Harrison leaned down to kiss her after they were pronounced husband and wife, it was supposed to be for show, a brief acknowledgement of the ceremony's completion. Instead, the moment his lips touched hers, Simone felt something electric shoot through her entire body. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it left her breathless and shaken, acutely aware that the man she'd just married was affecting her in ways that had nothing to do with business arrangements. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Blackstone, James said warmly, shaking both their hands. Mrs. Blackstone. Simone tested the name silently, surprised by how right it sounded, how much she wanted it to be real. As they signed the marriage certificate, Harrison's hand briefly covered hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, in what might have been an accident, or might have been a deliberate caress. Well, Mrs. Blackstone, Harrison said as they left the courthouse, using her new name for the first time. I suppose we should discuss the practicalities of living together. Practical, Simone agreed, though the word felt inadequate to describe the complex emotions swirling through her. They spent the afternoon moving Simone's belongings into Harrison's penthouse, a process that felt both intimate and surreal. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. Sleek, modern, expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city. What she hadn't expected was how personal it felt, filled with books and art that revealed sides of Harrison she was only beginning to discover. Your room is down this hall, Harrison said, leading her to the guest suite that would be hers for the next year. It has its own bathroom and sitting area. You should have complete privacy. The room was beautiful, spacious and elegantly decorated with warm colors that made it feel welcoming rather than sterile. But as Simone set down her suitcases, she couldn't help but notice that Harrison's bedroom was just across the hall, close enough that she would hear him moving around at night, close enough that the intimacy of their living arrangement would be impossible to ignore. Thank you, she said, turning to find Harrison watching her with an unreadable expression. It's perfect. Good, he said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, looking suddenly uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. Harrison, is everything all right? He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Finally, he stepped into the room, closing the distance between them until they were standing close enough that Simone could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. Simone, he said, her name coming out rougher than usual. I need you to know that this. He gestured between them. Whatever this is that's happening between us, it's not part of the contract. I know, she whispered, her heart beginning to race. And I need you to know that if you ever feel uncomfortable, if you ever want to change the terms or end the arrangement early, you just have to say the word. Simone looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice, the genuine care in his expression. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, but Harrison was treating her like someone precious, someone worthy of protection and consideration. What if I don't want to change the terms? She asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. Harrison's breath caught, and for a moment Simone thought he might reach for her, might close the small distance between them and make this arrangement infinitely more complicated. Instead, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Then we take this one day at a time, he said, and we try to remember that this is temporary. As Harrison left her to unpack, Simone sank onto the bed, her hands shaking slightly. Temporary. The word felt like a knife to her heart, even though it was exactly what she'd signed up for. In 1 year, their marriage would end, Harrison would have his inheritance secured, and she would disappear back into her real life, assuming her deception hadn't destroyed both their lives by then. But as she began hanging her clothes in the spacious closet, all Simone could think about was how much she already dreaded the day she would have to leave. That first week of living together was an exercise in exquisite torture for both of them. They maintained careful politeness during the day, professional distance when they worked together, but the evenings were filled with moments that felt dangerously close to genuine intimacy. "How do you take your coffee?" Harrison asked on their third morning, standing in the kitchen wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that emphasized the lean muscle of his chest and arms. "Black," Simone replied, trying not to stare at the way the morning light caught in his hair, making it look almost golden. "Really? I had you pegged for someone who liked cream and sugar." "Why?" she asked, accepting the mug he offered her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Because you're—" Harrison paused, as if realizing he was about to say something too revealing. "Because you seem like someone who appreciates sweetness." The comment hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Simone took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to steady herself. "I learned to drink it black in college," she said. "Too many late nights studying, not enough money for fancy coffee shop drinks." "What did you study?" Harrison asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, seemingly in no hurry to start their day. "Business and psychology," Simone replied, then caught herself. She was supposed to be building a cover story, not sharing real details about her life. "I was fascinated by consumer behavior, what makes people make the choices they do." "And what did you conclude?" Simone looked at him over her coffee mug, noting the genuine interest in his expression. "That most people don't make rational decisions. They make emotional ones, and then find rational justifications afterward." "Is that what you think I did? With this marriage arrangement?" The question caught Simone off guard. "What do you mean?" Harrison moved closer until he was standing just a few feet away from her. I told myself this was purely practical, a business solution to a business problem. But if I'm being honest—" "If you're being honest?" Simone prompted, her heart hammering against her ribs. "If I'm being honest, there were a dozen other ways I could have solved the inheritance issue. I chose this one because it meant spending a year with you." The confession hit Simone like a physical blow, both thrilling and devastating. Harrison was admitting that his feelings for her had influenced his supposedly rational business decision, which made her own deception feel even more cruel. "Harrison," she started, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to reciprocate or acknowledge it," he said. "I just needed you to know that this arrangement might not be as purely business as we pretended." Before Simone could respond, Harrison's phone buzzed with an incoming call. As he answered it, moving into the living room to take the call privately, Simone remained in the kitchen, gripping her coffee mug like an anchor. She was falling in love with her fake husband, and every day was making it harder to remember that she was supposed to be betraying him. 3 weeks into their marriage, the first major test of their arrangement arrived in the form of the Donovan Industries Charity Gala, a high-profile event where Harrison's presence as a married man would be closely scrutinized by business associates and potential investors. "We need to be convincing," Harrison said as they prepared for the evening, adjusting his black tie in the mirror of his bedroom while Simone got ready across the hall. "How convincing?" Simone called through the open doors. "Convincing enough that no one questions whether we're genuinely married," Harrison replied. "Which means we need to look like we're comfortable with each other, like we—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Like we're in love?" Simone finished, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "Yes," Harrison said quietly. "Like we're in love." When Simone emerged from her room, wearing a midnight blue cocktail dress that hugged her curves and made her skin glow, Harrison felt his breath catch in his throat. She was stunning, not just beautiful, but radiant with a confidence that made every other woman in the world seem dim by comparison. "You look," Harrison started, then stopped, apparently at a loss for words. "Appropriate for a charity gala?" Simone suggested, though she could see something much more personal in his expression. "You look like the kind of woman a man would marry for love," Harrison said, his voice rough with honesty. The compliment sent warmth spreading through Simone's chest, even as it made her guilt intensify. She was dressed for deception, playing a role that was becoming more real every day. "Thank you," she said softly. You look pretty devastating yourself." Harrison did look devastating in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his blonde hair styled just slightly tousled, his blue eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. They made a striking couple, and Simone knew that convincing people they were in love wouldn't require much acting. The gala was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a glittering affair with hundreds of guests, live music, and enough diamonds to fund a small country. As they walked into the ballroom together, Harrison's hand resting possessively on Simone's lower back, she felt the weight of dozens of curious gazes. "Harrison Blackstone," a voice called out, and they turned to see a distinguished older woman approaching with arms outstretched. "And this must be the mysterious wife we've all been hearing about." "Margaret," Harrison said warmly, kissing the woman's cheek. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Simone." "Simone, this is Margaret Whitmore, one of the city's most formidable philanthropists." "And one of Harrison's oldest family friends," Margaret added, taking Simone's hands in hers and studying her with sharp, kind eyes. "My dear, you're even more beautiful than the rumors suggested." "Thank you," Simone said, falling easily into the role. "Harrison's told me so much about your work with literacy programs." "Has he?" Margaret looked delighted. "Well, any woman who can make Harrison Blackstone settle down must be extraordinary." As Margaret was pulled away by another guest, Harrison leaned down to speak quietly in Simone's ear. "You're a natural at this." "At what?" Simone asked, distracted by the warmth of his breath against her skin. "At being my wife." The comment sent a shiver through Simone that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Before she could respond, they were approached by another couple, then another, each interaction requiring them to present themselves as a happily married pair. Harrison was masterful at it, his hand never leaving her waist or back, his attention seemingly focused entirely on her, even when talking to other people. He introduced her with pride, listened to her conversations with genuine interest, and looked at her with such convincing affection that Simone began to wonder how much was performance and how much was real. "Dance with me," Harrison said during a lull in conversations, extending his hand as the orchestra began playing a slow waltz. "I should warn you," Simone said, taking his hand. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Just follow my lead," Harrison replied, pulling her into his arms on the dance floor. But as they began to move together, Simone discovered that dancing with Harrison felt as natural as breathing. He led with confidence but gentleness, his hand warm and sure on her back, his other hand holding hers with careful reverence. "You lied about not being a good dancer," Harrison said, his voice low and intimate. "You make it easy," Simone replied, looking up into his face, noting the way the ballroom lights caught in his eyes. They moved together in perfect synchronization, and Simone became acutely aware of every point of contact between their bodies. His hand on her back, her palm against his shoulder, the way their legs occasionally brushed as they turned. "Simone," Harrison said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes? I need you to know that this, tonight, right now, this isn't pretending for me." Simone's breath caught, her step faltering slightly before Harrison steadied her. "Harrison, I know we agreed this was business," he continued, his blue eyes intense and searching. "But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is professional." They had stopped dancing, standing still in the middle of the dance floor while other couples moved around them. Simone felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, just this moment of truth that was both beautiful and terrifying. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with my wife," Harrison said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "And I don't care if that complicates everything." Before Simone could respond, before she could tell him that she was falling in love with him too, or that her feelings were going to complicate things in ways he couldn't imagine, Harrison leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the brief, performative kiss from their wedding ceremony. This was deep, passionate, full of longing and desire that had been building for weeks. Simone melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body responding to his touch with an intensity that shocked her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Simone saw her own desire reflected in Harrison's eyes. "Take me home," she whispered, the words coming out before she could stop them. Harrison's expression went dark with want. Are you sure? I'm sure, Simone said, even though she was sure of nothing except that she needed to be alone with him, needed to stop pretending that what was happening between them was anything other than the most real thing in her life. They left the gala early, Harrison's hand possessively holding hers as they made their excuses and headed for the elevator. The ride up to the penthouse was charged with sexual tension, both of them acutely aware that they were about to cross a line that would change everything between them. As soon as the penthouse door closed behind them, Harrison turned to face Simone, his expression both tender and hungry. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, his voice rough with desire. Instead of answering with words, Simone reached up and began loosening his tie, her fingers moving with deliberate slowness. "I don't want to change my mind," she said. "I want you, Harrison. I want this." Harrison's control snapped. He pulled her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers with desperate hunger. Simone responded with equal passion, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body arching against his. They made their way toward his bedroom, kissing and touching, pausing against walls and door frames, both desperate to be closer, to finally give in to the attraction that had been consuming them both. In his bedroom, Harrison's movements became gentler, more reverent, as if he understood the significance of what they were about to do. "Simone," he said, his hands framing her face, "I need you to know that this changes everything for me. After tonight, I won't be able to pretend this is just a business arrangement." "I don't want to pretend anymore either," Simone whispered, meaning every word, even as her heart broke with the knowledge of her deception. What followed was a night of passion that surpassed anything either of them had experienced before. Harrison made love to her with a combination of tenderness and intensity that left Simone feeling completely claimed, completely his. And in the aftermath, as they lay tangled together in his bed, both of them knew that their fake marriage had become the most real thing in their lives. But as Harrison slept peacefully beside her, his arm possessively wrapped around her waist, Simone stared at the ceiling and wondered how she was going to tell the man she loved that everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. The morning after their first night together, Simone woke up in Harrison's arms, feeling like her world had shifted on its axis. The early sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows painted everything in golden hues, making the moment feel dreamlike and precious. Harrison was still asleep, his face relaxed and younger-looking in repose, his arm tightened protectively around her waist. Simone allowed herself a few minutes to study him, the strong line of his jaw, the way his blonde hair fell across his forehead, the peaceful expression that replaced his usual intensity. For just a moment, she let herself imagine that this was real, that she was exactly who she claimed to be, that the man holding her had fallen in love with the real Simone rather than the carefully constructed version she'd presented to him. But reality crept in with the morning light, and with it came the crushing weight of her deception. Every kiss they'd shared last night, every whispered endearment, every moment of breathtaking intimacy had been built on lies she was telling him about her very identity. "Good morning, beautiful," Harrison said, his voice rough with sleep as his eyes opened to find her watching him. "Good morning," Simone replied, her voice coming out softer than she'd intended. Harrison shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her properly. "No regrets?" he asked, though something in his expression suggested he was afraid of her answer. Simone reached up to touch his face, her thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "No regrets," she said, and it was the truth. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, she would never regret having this with him. Harrison's smile was brilliant and relieved. He leaned down to kiss her, slow and thorough, and Simone felt herself melting into him all over again. "I should probably get ready for work," she said when they finally broke apart, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Probably," Harrison agreed, but his hands were already sliding down her body, clearly having other ideas about how they should spend their morning. What followed was another hour of passionate lovemaking that left them both breathless and running late for their respective meetings. But as they finally disentangled themselves and began getting dressed, Simone noticed a shift in the dynamic between them. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by an intimacy that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Simone? Harrison said as she was about to leave for her own office, catching her hand and pulling her back for another kiss. I know this complicates everything, but I'm not sorry it happened. Neither am I, Simone said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him back. As she left the penthouse and made her way through the city to her consulting office, Simone felt like she was living in two different worlds. In one world, she was a woman falling desperately in love with her husband, building something beautiful and real with a man who saw and appreciated every part of her. In the other world, she was a corporate spy whose growing feelings were threatening to destroy the mission that had brought them together. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Status report needed. Board meeting tomorrow requires update on Blackstone's situation. Simone stared at the message, her stomach churning with guilt and dread. She'd been so caught up in her developing relationship with Harrison that she'd almost forgotten she was supposed to be gathering intelligence about his business operations. The reminder felt like a bucket of cold water, shocking her back to the reality of her situation. That afternoon, Harrison surprised her by appearing at her office with lunch and a smile that made her heart skip. I thought you might be hungry, he said, setting down a bag from her favorite deli. How had he remembered her mentioning it in passing weeks ago? Thank you, Simone said, genuinely touched by the gesture. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Harrison interrupted, moving around her desk to stand close to her. I wanted to see you. Is that pathetic? We've been apart for 4 hours and I missed you. Simone looked up at him, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression, and felt her heart crack a little more. It's not pathetic, she whispered. I missed you too. Harrison leaned down to kiss her, and Simone could taste the promise of forever on his lips. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Have dinner with me tonight, he said. Somewhere special. I want to take my wife on a proper date. We're already married, Simone pointed out, though she was smiling. We did everything backwards, Harrison replied. Contract first, wedding second, falling in love third. The least I can do is take you on a real date. That evening, Harrison took her to a small, intimate restaurant tucked away from the main downtown district. It was the kind of place that felt like a secret, with candlelit tables and soft jazz music, and the sense that the outside world couldn't touch whatever was happening between its walls. How did you find this place? Simone asked as they were seated at a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the city lights. I've been saving it, Harrison admitted, for someone special. And I qualify as someone special? Simone asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the way her heart was racing. Harrison reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. Simone, you're the most special person I've ever met. They talked through dinner, really talked about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about building his first company from his college dorm room, about the failures that had taught him resilience, about his dreams for the future. Simone found herself sharing carefully edited versions of her own stories, talking about her love of strategy and psychology, her desire to build something meaningful with her career. What do you want, Simone? Harrison asked as they shared dessert. Not what you think you should want, not what's practical or smart. What do you really want? The question caught Simone off guard, both because of its directness and because she realized she knew the answer immediately. I want this, she said softly. I want you. I want us. I want to build something real together. Harrison's smile was soft and wondering. Even if it's complicated? Especially if it's complicated, Simone replied, meaning every word even as she was acutely aware of how complicated things were about to become. As they walked home through the city streets, Harrison's arm around her waist, Simone felt like she was living in a movie. Everything was perfect. The warm evening air, the man beside her, the sense of being exactly where she belonged. Stay with me tonight, Harrison said as they reached the penthouse. In my room. I don't want to sleep without you anymore. Yes, Simone said without hesitation, though she knew that sleeping in Harrison's bed would make everything more real, more impossible to walk away from when the time came. But that night, as they made love with a passion that seemed to grow stronger each time they touched, Simone pushed thoughts of the future away. Whatever came next, whatever price she would have to pay for these stolen moments of happiness, she would deal with it tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to be Harrison's wife in every way that mattered. Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine that felt remarkably like a real marriage. They shared morning coffee and evening dinners, worked together on business projects with an efficiency that impressed both of them, and spent their nights learning each other's bodies with a passion that never seemed to diminish. Harrison was an attentive husband, bringing her flowers for no reason, remembering her preferences for everything from coffee to music, listening to her thoughts and opinions with genuine interest. He made her feel valued, respected, desired in ways she'd never experienced before. But with each passing day, Simone's guilt grew heavier. Her father's demands for information became more frequent and more specific. Richard Ashford was planning something significant, something that would require detailed knowledge of Harrison's business operations, and he expected his daughter to provide it. "The Meridian acquisition," Richard said during one of their phone calls. "I need to know Harrison's strategy, his timeline, his vulnerabilities." "Dad, I'm not sure I can." "You can and you will," Richard interrupted, his tone turning cold. "This isn't a request, Simone. This is family business." After ending the call, Simone sat in her office staring at her computer screen, which displayed confidential emails from Harrison's acquisition team. She had the information her father wanted. Harrison trusted her completely now, included her in strategic discussions, shared his plans and concerns with the openness of a man who believed his wife was his true partner. All she had to do was forward a few emails, share some meeting notes, and her father would have what he needed to undermine the Meridian deal. It would be a professional setback for Harrison, but not a catastrophic one. So why did the thought of betraying his trust make her feel physically sick? Her internal conflict was interrupted by Harrison appearing in her office doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "Thought you could use some caffeine," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk and settling into the chair across from her. "Thank you," Simone said, closing her laptop quickly, too quickly, based on the curious look Harrison gave her. "Everything all right? You seem stressed lately." Simone forced a smile. "Just the usual client pressures." Harrison studied her face with the intensity that had first attracted her to him. "Simone, is there something that you're not telling me?" The question hit too close to home, and Simone felt her careful composure crack slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've seemed distant lately. Distracted. Like there's something weighing on your mind that you don't want to share with me." Harrison moved his chair closer to hers, reaching out to take her hands. "I know we didn't start this marriage in the traditional way, but I thought we'd move past keeping secrets from each other." The irony was devastating. Harrison was asking for honesty while she was drowning in deception, asking for openness while she was hiding the most fundamental truths about herself. "Harrison," she started, then stopped. How could she explain that she was keeping secrets that could destroy everything they'd built together? "Talk to me," Harrison said gently. "Whatever it is, we can handle it together." The kindness in his voice, the genuine care in his expression, the way he said "we" like they were truly a team, it all combined to break something inside Simone's chest. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Harrison's face transformed, lit up with joy and relief. "I love you too," he said, pulling her into his arms. "God, Simone, I love you so much it terrifies me." They held each other tightly, and Simone felt like she was trying to memorize the moment, the warmth of his body against hers, the scent of his cologne, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Because she was beginning to understand that loving Harrison meant she was going to have to make a choice that would tear her apart. She could betray him and keep her family's love, or she could protect him and lose everything else she'd ever known. That night, as they lay in bed after making love with a desperate intensity that left them both shaken, Harrison traced lazy patterns on Simone's bare back. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "About what?" "About us. About making this permanent." Simone's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Harrison shifted so he could look at her face. "I mean, I want to tear up the contract. I want to marry you for real, Simone, not for business or inheritance or any practical reason. I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you. The proposal should have been the most wonderful moment of Simone's life. Instead, it felt like her world was collapsing. Harrison was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, and she was going to have to break his heart to protect him. "Harrison," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Is that a no?" he asked, misreading her emotional response. "It's not a no," Simone said, cupping his face in her hands. "It's complicated." "Then let's uncomplicate it," Harrison said, his voice full of hope and determination. "Whatever's making this complicated, we'll figure it out together." If only it were that simple, Simone thought as she kissed him with all the love and desperation in her heart. If only the complications weren't about to destroy both their lives. The crisis began on a Monday morning with a phone call that changed everything. Harrison was in the shower when his phone rang, and Simone answered it without thinking, a gesture so natural and wifely that it felt like the most normal thing in the world. "Harrison Blackstone's phone," she said. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was cold, authoritative, and vaguely familiar. "This is his wife. Can I take a message?" There was a long pause. Then, "This is David Chang. I think you and I need to have a conversation." Simone's blood turned to ice. David Chang, her father's business associate, the man who'd been in Harrison's office that day weeks ago. The man who knew exactly who she really was. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Simone said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, but we do," David replied smoothly. "We have a great deal to discuss. Meet me at the Meridian Hotel coffee shop in 1 hour, or I make a very interesting phone call to your husband." The line went dead, and Simone stood frozen in the bedroom, phone clutched in her shaking hand. David Chang knew her real identity, and he was going to expose her unless she met with him. The game was up, and she was about to lose everything. "Who was that?" Harrison asked, emerging from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair still damp. "Wrong number," Simone lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. An hour later, Simone sat across from David Chang in the hotel coffee shop, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. "You've been busy," David said without preamble, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. "Marrying Harrison Blackstone. Very creative approach to the assignment your father gave you." "What do you want?" Simone asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know how much you've told him about your real identity." "Nothing," Simone said. "He doesn't know who I am." David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. Then we can keep this simple. Your father needs the Meridian acquisition details, and he needs them today." "I can't." "You can and you will," David interrupted, "because if you don't, I'll make sure Harrison learns exactly who his loving wife really is. And I'll make sure he learns it in the most humiliating way possible." Simone felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "What exactly does my father want?" "Everything. Financial projections, timeline, negotiation strategy, backup plans, everything Harrison has shared with his beloved wife." The way David said "beloved wife" made Simone's skin crawl. She was trapped, and they both knew it. "I need time," she said desperately. "You have until 5 p.m. today," David replied, standing up. "Send everything to the usual email address. And Simone, if you're thinking about warning Harrison, remember that your father has ways of making his displeasure known that extend far beyond just exposing your little deception." After David left, Simone sat in the coffee shop staring at her untouched latte, her mind racing through options she didn't have. She could confess everything to Harrison, but that would mean watching the love in his eyes turn to betrayal and hatred. She could provide the information David wanted, but that would mean actively betraying the man she loved for the sake of a family that was threatening her. Or she could disappear. Leave town, abandon her identity as Simone Parker, and start over somewhere else. It would protect Harrison from the immediate threat, but it would also destroy him emotionally and leave him vulnerable to whatever larger plan her father was orchestrating. None of the options would save them both. Someone was going to get hurt, and Simone was going to be the one wielding the knife. She returned to the penthouse to find Harrison in his home office, surrounded by papers related to the Meridian acquisition. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up with the smile that never failed to make her heart race. "There you are," he said, pushing back from his desk to pull her into his arms. "I missed you." "I missed you too," Simone said, letting herself melt into his embrace for what might be the last time. "Good news about Meridian," Harrison said, his excitement evident. "The final negotiations are happening tomorrow. If everything goes according to plan, we'll close the deal by the end of the week." Simone pulled back to look at his face, noting the satisfaction and pride in his expression. The Meridian acquisition represented months of work, millions of dollars, and a significant expansion of Harrison's business empire. It was also exactly what her father needed to launch his own competitive strategy. "That's wonderful," she said, the words feeling like they were being dragged from her throat. "It's more than wonderful," Harrison said, spinning her around in celebration. "It's going to change everything for the company, and the timing couldn't be better. I want everything settled before we start planning our real wedding." The mention of their future wedding felt like a knife to Simone's heart. Harrison was planning a life with her, trusting her with his business secrets, sharing his dreams and ambitions, all while she was preparing to betray him in the most fundamental way possible. "Harrison," she said, her voice breaking slightly. He must have heard something in her tone because his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" Simone looked at the man she loved, memorizing his face, the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. In a few hours, that look would be gone forever. "Nothing," she lied. "I'm just emotional about how well everything is going." Harrison's smile returned, soft and understanding. "I know. Sometimes I can't believe how perfect this has become." Perfect. The word echoed in Simone's mind as she spent the afternoon gathering the information David had demanded. Financial projections, negotiation strategies, timeline details, everything Harrison had shared with her in confidence, everything that proved how completely he trusted her. As 5 o'clock approached, Simone sat at her laptop with the email draft ready to send. All she had to do was hit send, and her father would have what he needed to undermine Harrison's deal. She would have fulfilled her obligation to her family, protected herself from David's threats, and destroyed the most precious thing in her life. Her finger hovered over the send button as she thought about Harrison's face when he talked about their future, about the way he'd held her that morning, about his plans for their real wedding. She thought about her father's expectations, David's threats, and the family loyalty that had been drilled into her since childhood. And then she thought about love, real love, and what it actually meant to protect someone you cared about more than your own safety. Simone deleted the email without sending it. Instead, she opened a new message and began typing. "Harrison, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Meet me at Riverside Park at 7 p.m. I'll explain everything then. Whatever happens after tonight, please know that everything I feel for you is real." She sent the message before she could lose her nerve, then sat back in her chair, her hands shaking. In 2 hours, she would tell Harrison the truth about who she was, about why she'd originally come into his life, about the family that was trying to destroy him. She would watch the love in his eyes turn to betrayal and hatred, and she would lose the only man she'd ever truly loved. But she would also save him from her father's trap, even if it cost her everything. At exactly 7 o'clock, Simone stood by the river in Riverside Park, watching Harrison walk toward her with confusion and concern written across his face. He looked devastatingly handsome in the early evening light, his business suit replaced by jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "Simone," he said when he reached her, immediately pulling her into his arms. "Your message scared me. What's wrong?" Looking up at him, seeing the genuine care and love in his expression, Simone felt her courage falter. How could she destroy this beautiful thing they'd built together? How could she be the one to bring pain into those blue eyes that looked at her like she was his entire world? "Harrison," she started, then stopped, her voice catching. "Whatever it is, we can handle it," Harrison said, cupping her face in his hands. "There's nothing you could tell me that would change how I feel about you." The words were meant to be comforting, but they made Simone's task infinitely harder. Harrison believed their love could survive anything, but he didn't understand the magnitude of her deception. "You don't know what you're saying," Simone whispered. "Then tell me," Harrison replied gently. "Help me understand." Simone took a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of her mouth would change everything between them forever. "My name isn't Simone Parker," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the river. "It's Simone Ashford Parker." Harrison's brow furrowed in confusion. "Ashford Parker? What does that—" Then understanding dawned, and Simone watched his face go pale. "Ashford, as in Richard Ashford." "He's my father," Simone said, the words feeling like they were being torn from her chest. Harrison stepped back from her as if she'd struck him, his hands falling away from her face. "Your father is Richard Ashford, my biggest business rival, the man who's been trying to destroy my company for 2 years. "Yes," Simone whispered. "And you?" Harrison's voice was growing harder, colder. "You came to work for me as what? A spy?" "Initially, yes," Simone admitted, tears beginning to fall. "But Harrison, please listen. Initially?" Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So this entire time, our marriage, our relationship, everything, it's all been part of some elaborate corporate espionage scheme?" "No," Simone said desperately, reaching for him, but Harrison stepped further away from her touch. "Harrison, that's not. It started that way, but everything changed. What I feel for you is real. What we have together is real." "Real?" Harrison's voice was rising now, anger beginning to replace the shock. "Simone, you lied to me about your name, your identity, your family, your reasons for being in my life. What exactly about that is real?" "My feelings for you," Simone said, her voice breaking. "My love for you. That was never fake, Harrison. I fell in love with you despite the circumstances, not because of them." Harrison stared at her, and Simone could see him processing the full scope of her deception. "The marriage contract," he said slowly. "You said you needed to be married for your trust fund. That was a lie too, wasn't it?" Simone nodded miserably. "I do have a trust fund that requires marriage, but that wasn't why I agreed to marry you. I agreed because I was falling in love with you, and the thought of walking away felt impossible." "So you decided to keep lying instead," Harrison said, his voice turning cold. "You decided to let me fall in love with a woman who doesn't even exist." "I exist," Simone said desperately. "The woman you fell in love with, she's real, Harrison. She's me. The only thing I lied about was my name and my family." "The only thing?" Harrison's voice was incredulous. "Simone, your family is actively trying to destroy everything I've worked for. You're the daughter of my enemy, and you've been living in my home, sharing my bed, learning all my business secrets. How am I supposed to trust anything you've ever said to me?" The question hit Simone like a physical blow because she knew he was right. Her deception had been so complete, so fundamental, that there was no way for Harrison to know what was real and what was manipulation. "Because I'm telling you the truth now," she said, though she knew how inadequate that sounded. "Because I chose you over my family. Because I'm here, risking everything to warn you that they're planning something." "Warn me about what?" Harrison asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he could believe anything she said. "The Meridian acquisition," Simone said quickly. "David Chang contacted me today. He threatened to expose my identity unless I gave him details about your negotiation strategy. My father is planning to use that information to undermine your deal somehow." Harrison's expression went from angry to dangerous. "And did you give him the information?" "No," Simone said immediately. "I couldn't do it, Harrison. I love you too much to betray you like that." "But you were supposed to," Harrison said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That was the plan all along. Marry me, gain my trust, and feed information back to your father." Simone nodded, hating herself for the truth she was admitting. "That was the original plan. But I fell in love with you, and everything changed. I haven't given my father any useful information about your business, Harrison. I've been protecting you, even when it meant lying to my own family." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but deadly. "How do I know that's true? How do I know this entire conversation isn't just another manipulation? Maybe telling me the truth is part of the plan. Maybe making me think you chose me over your family is exactly what your father wants." The accusation cut Simone deeper than anything else he could have said, because she could see the logic in it from his perspective. Her deception had been so complete that now even her honesty looked suspect. "Because I'm destroying my life to save yours," Simone said, tears streaming down her face. "Because after tonight, I'll have nothing left. My family will disown me. David will expose me anyway out of spite, and you'll never trust me again. I'm losing everything to protect you, Harrison. If that's not proof of love, I don't know what is." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, and Simone saw something flicker in his eyes: pain, longing, the ghost of the love that had been there just hours ago. "Maybe it is proof of love," he said finally, "but it's also proof that you're capable of deceiving me completely while looking me in the eye and telling me you love me." "How am I ever supposed to trust you again, Simone? How am I supposed to believe anything you say when your entire identity has been a lie?" The question hung between them, and Simone realized she didn't have an answer. Harrison was right. She had destroyed the foundation of trust their relationship was built on, and she had no idea how to rebuild it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to fix this, Harrison. I just know that I love you, and I'm sorry, and I would do anything to take back the lies." "Anything except tell me the truth from the beginning," Harrison said quietly. They stood looking at each other across a distance that felt like miles, both of them understanding that this conversation was ending their marriage in all the ways that mattered. "I should go," Simone said finally, knowing that staying would only make this harder for both of them. "Yeah," Harrison agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You should." As Simone turned to walk away, Harrison called her name one last time. "Simone?" She turned back, hope flickering in her chest. "For what it's worth," Harrison said, "I believe that you love me, but love isn't enough to fix this. Some betrayals are too big to forgive." Simone nodded, her heart breaking completely as she walked away from the only man she'd ever loved, knowing that she'd destroyed the most beautiful thing in her life to save it. Behind her, Harrison stood by the river until long after she'd disappeared, mourning the loss of a love that had felt like everything, and trying to figure out how to protect his business from a family that had just proven they would stop at nothing to destroy him. Have you ever been in a situation where telling the truth would hurt someone you love? Where you had to choose between honesty and protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most difficult choices are the ones that define who we really are. The aftermath of that conversation by the river was swift and devastating. Within 24 hours, Simone had moved out of Harrison's penthouse and back into a small apartment across town. Within 48 hours, David Chang had made good on his threat and exposed her identity to several key business associates, ensuring that word of Harrison's fake marriage to his rival's daughter would spread through their professional circles like wildfire. Harrison threw himself into damage control with the single-minded focus that had built his empire. He met with lawyers about dissolving the marriage, with PR specialists about managing the scandal, and with security experts about protecting his business interests from further infiltration. But late at night, alone in the penthouse that still smelled faintly of Simone's perfume, Harrison found himself staring at the ceiling and remembering the way she'd looked when she'd told him she loved him. The pain in her voice when she'd said she was destroying her life to save his. The tears on her face as she'd walked away. Meanwhile, Simone was discovering exactly what it meant to choose love over family loyalty. Richard Ashford's fury when he learned of her betrayal was volcanic and swift. She was cut off financially, banned from family properties, and informed that she was no longer welcome at Ashford Media or any of its subsidiary companies. "You foolish girl," Richard had raged during their final phone conversation. "You threw away everything, your inheritance, your future, your family, for a man who doesn't even want you anymore." The words stung because they were true. Simone had sacrificed everything to protect Harrison, and he still couldn't forgive her deception. She was left with nothing. No family, no husband, no financial security, no clear path forward. But even in the midst of her devastation, Simone didn't regret her choice. Every morning when she woke up alone in her tiny apartment, she thought about Harrison and felt a fierce satisfaction that he was safe from her father's schemes, even if he would never know the full extent of what she'd given up to protect him. What Simone didn't know was that Harrison was beginning to understand exactly what she'd sacrificed. 3 weeks after their confrontation by the river, Harrison was in his office when James Morrison arrived with information that changed everything. "I've been investigating the Ashford family situation," James said, settling into the chair across from Harrison's desk. "What I found is illuminating." "I'm listening," Harrison said, though his voice was carefully neutral. "Richard Ashford has disowned his daughter," James reported. "Completely. She's been cut off from the family fortune, banned from the business, essentially erased from the Ashford legacy." Harrison felt something twist in his chest. "When?" "The same week you separated." "Harrison, she wasn't exaggerating when she said she'd destroyed her life to protect yours. Richard Ashford is worth over $200 million, and Simone was his only heir. She gave up everything to warn you about their plans." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "What else did you find?" "David Chang has been bragging to business associates about the brilliant espionage operation that placed Richard Ashford's daughter in your bed. According to my sources, the plan was for Simone to seduce you, gain access to your business strategies, and feed information back to her father for at least 2 years. 2 years? Harrison repeated. The contract marriage was never part of their original plan, James continued. That seems to have been Simone's own decision, which apparently infuriated her father when he found out about it. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Simone had been following her father's original plan, she would have seduced him and disappeared with his business secrets months ago. Instead, she'd married him, fallen in love with him, and ultimately betrayed her own family to protect him. There's more, James said gently. I had my investigator look into Simone's activities over the past few months. Harrison, she hasn't given her father any significant information about your business. In fact, there's evidence that she actively misdirected him several times, providing false information that led to failed strategies on Ashford Media's part. The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow. Simone hadn't just refused to betray him at the end, she'd been protecting him all along, even while maintaining her cover. She was playing both sides, Harrison said slowly, understanding dawning. More accurately, she chose your side early on and spent months protecting you while pretending to still be loyal to her father, James corrected. Harrison, that woman sacrificed everything she had, family, fortune, future, to keep you safe. The question is, what are you going to do about it? That evening, Harrison found himself driving to Simone's apartment building without having made a conscious decision to go there. He sat in his car outside her building for nearly an hour, wrestling with emotions he'd been trying to suppress for weeks. He was still hurt by her deception, still angry that she'd lied to him about something so fundamental. But he was also beginning to understand that her situation had been more complex than he'd initially realized. She'd been trapped between loyalty to her family and love for him, and she'd ultimately chosen love, even when that choice cost her everything else. Finally, Harrison got out of his car and made his way to Simone's apartment. When she opened the door, he was shocked by what he saw. She looked exhausted, thinner than before, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been sleeping as poorly as he had. Harrison, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, what are you doing here? I talked to James Morrison today, Harrison said. He told me about your father disowning you. Simone's face went carefully blank. I see. He also told me that you've been protecting me for months, that you fed your father false information instead of real intelligence about my business. Does it matter? Simone asked, though he could see the hope she was trying to hide. It matters, Harrison said. It matters that you chose me over your family long before that night by the river. It matters that you sacrificed a $200 million inheritance to keep me safe. Simone looked down at her hands. I didn't do it for gratitude, Harrison. I did it because I love you. I know, Harrison said softly, and I need you to know that I love you too. I never stopped loving you, even when I was furious and hurt and convinced that everything between us was a lie. Simone's head snapped up, tears forming in her eyes. "Harrison." "Let me finish," Harrison said, stepping closer to her. "What you did, lying to me about your identity, it hurt. It broke something between us that I'm still not sure how to fix. But what you did after that, choosing me, protecting me, sacrificing everything for me, that means everything." "So where does that leave us?" Simone asked, her voice shaking. Harrison reached out to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "It leaves us with a choice. We can let the lies destroy what we built together, or we can choose to rebuild it on a foundation of complete honesty." "Even if it's hard?" Simone whispered. "Especially if it's hard," Harrison replied. "Simone, I don't want a perfect love story. I want our love story, messy and complicated and real. I want the woman who loved me enough to give up everything to protect me. Even though I lied to you? Because you ultimately chose truth over safety," Harrison said. "Because when it mattered most, you chose love over everything else." Harrison leaned down to kiss her, and it tasted like forgiveness and second chances, and the promise of something stronger than what they'd had before. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," Simone whispered against his lips. "I love you too," Harrison replied. "And this time, we're going to build something that can survive anything, including the truth." The process of rebuilding their relationship was nothing like the fairy tale romance of their early days together. It was harder, messier, and required a level of honesty that left both of them feeling raw and vulnerable most of the time. They started with small steps. Harrison helped Simone find a new apartment. Nothing as grand as his penthouse, but a comfortable one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood that she could afford with her consulting income. They had dinner together twice a week, neutral territory meetings where they talked about everything except the future of their relationship. "Tell me about your childhood," Harrison said one evening as they shared Thai food in Simone's new living room. The real version this time. Simone set down her chopsticks, considering how to answer. "It was lonely," she said finally. "My father was always working, always focused on the business. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, it was mostly just me and a series of nannies and housekeepers." "Is that why you went along with his plan? Because you wanted his approval?" "Partly," Simone admitted. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of being Richard Ashford's daughter. I thought if I could help him destroy his biggest competitor, he'd finally see me as valuable." Harrison reached across the coffee table to take her hand. "You are valuable, Simone, not because of what you can do for someone else, but because of who you are." "I'm still learning to believe that," Simone said softly. These conversations happened gradually, over weeks and months. Harrison told her about growing up with an absent father and a mother who died too young, about building his first company to prove he didn't need anyone's help, about the loneliness that had driven him to accept a marriage of convenience in the first place. "I thought I wanted someone who wouldn't expect too much from me emotionally," Harrison admitted during one of their dinners. "Someone who would be content with a business arrangement. And instead you got me," Simone said with a rueful smile. "Instead I got the most emotionally honest woman I'd ever met, even when she was lying about everything else," Harrison replied. The physical distance between them was the hardest part. They were learning to trust each other again, but the passionate intimacy they'd shared felt too fragile to risk. Instead, they built their connection through words, through shared meals, through the gradual revelation of their true selves to each other. "I miss touching you," Harrison said one evening as they walked through the park where they'd had their devastating confrontation months earlier. "I miss it too," Simone admitted. "But I'm terrified that if we complicate things with physical intimacy before we've really rebuilt the trust, we might lose each other again," Harrison finished. "Yes." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "Simone, I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens between us physically, I'm committed to working through this." "Even if it takes years?" Simone asked. "Even if it takes years," Harrison confirmed. But as it turned out, their restraint lasted exactly 3 more weeks. It was a Tuesday evening, and they were in Harrison's office working on a consulting project together. The first time Simone had been back in his building since their separation. The work was going well, their professional partnership as strong as ever, when Simone accidentally knocked over her coffee cup. "Oh no," she said, jumping up to clean the spill before it could damage the papers on Harrison's desk. Harrison moved to help her, and they collided in their haste to save the documents. Simone stumbled, and Harrison's arm came around her waist to steady her, pulling her against his chest. For a moment, they stood frozen, bodies pressed together, both of them acutely aware of how long it had been since they'd touched each other like this. Simone could feel Harrison's heart racing against her chest, could see the desire darkening his blue eyes. "Simone," he said, her name coming out rough and wanting. "I know we said we'd wait," she whispered, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Do you want to wait?" Harrison asked, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "No," Simone breathed. "I don't want to wait anymore." Harrison's control snapped. He backed her against his desk, his mouth crashing down on hers with months of suppressed longing. Simone responded with equal desperation, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body arching against his. "Are you sure?" Harrison asked between kisses, his hands framing her face. "I'm sure," Simone said, pulling him closer. "I need you, Harrison. I need this." What followed was an afternoon of passion that was different from their early days together. Deeper, more intense, colored by everything they'd survived to find each other again. They made love with the desperation of people who'd almost lost each other, and the reverence of people who understood exactly how precious their connection was. Afterward, as they lay tangled together on the leather couch in Harrison's office, both of them knew that they'd crossed another line in their journey back to each other. "No regrets?" Harrison asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Simone's bare back. "Only that we waited so long," Simone replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "I wanted to make sure we were doing this for the right reasons," Harrison said. "And what are the right reasons?" Harrison lifted her chin so he could look into her eyes. "Because we love each other. Because we're choosing each other every day, not out of convenience or necessity, but because we can't imagine being with anyone else." "Is that what we're doing?" Simone asked. "Choosing each other?" "Every day," Harrison confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss. That evening, as they walked back to Simone's apartment together, Harrison brought up the subject they'd been carefully avoiding. "I want you to move back in with me," he said as they stood outside her building. "Harrison." "Not because it's convenient or because we're technically still married," he interrupted. "Because I love you, and I want to build a life with you, a real life, based on who we actually are." Simone looked up at him, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression. "What about the legal marriage? The contracts?" "We tear them up," Harrison said simply. "All of them. And then I ask you to marry me again, for real this time, because I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." "Even after everything?" Simone asked. "Especially after everything," Harrison replied. "Simone, what we went through, the lies, the betrayal, the choice to fight for each other anyway, that's not the end of our story. That's the foundation. We know now that our love is strong enough to survive the worst possible circumstances. And if we face more challenges, then we face them together," Harrison said, taking her hands in his, "with complete honesty, complete trust, and the absolute certainty that we choose each other above everything else." Simone felt tears forming in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to moving in with me. Yes to all of it," Simone said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "Yes to rebuilding our life together. Yes to marrying you for real. Yes to choosing each other every single day." Harrison's smile was brilliant and relieved. He spun her around in celebration, both of them laughing like teenagers. "When?" he asked as he set her back down. "When what?" "When do you want to have our real wedding?" Simone pretended to consider. "How about tomorrow?" Harrison laughed. "I was thinking we might want a little more planning than that." "Why? We already know we want to spend our lives together. We already know we love each other. We already know we can survive anything as long as we face it together. What's left to plan?" Harrison looked at her with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Nothing," he said. "Absolutely nothing." 6 months later, Harrison and Simone stood in the same small chapel where they'd held their contract wedding, but everything about this ceremony was different. This time, they were surrounded by friends who knew their real story and had watched them fight their way back to each other. This time, their vows were written from the heart rather than drafted by lawyers. "Simone," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "I promise to love you not just for who you are, but for who you're still becoming. I promise to choose you every day, in good times and bad, in moments of joy and in moments when we have to rebuild what we've broken. I promise to never let fear make my decisions for us, and to always trust that what we have is stronger than any challenge we might face." "Harrison," Simone replied, her own voice thick with emotion, "I promise to love you with complete honesty, even when the truth is difficult. I promise to choose you over everything else, including my own fears and doubts. I promise to trust you with my whole heart and to earn your trust every single day. I promise to build a life with you that's worth every struggle it took to find each other." When they kissed to seal their new vows, it felt like a beginning rather than a conclusion. The start of a marriage built on truth, tested by adversity, and strengthened by the choice to love each other despite imperfection. The reception was small and intimate, held in the garden of Harrison's penthouse. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, for real this time, Simone thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Any regrets?" Harrison asked, echoing the question he'd asked her so many times before. "Just one," Simone said, surprising him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us so long to realize that the most beautiful love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other," Simone said. "They're about imperfect people who choose to keep loving each other anyway." Harrison spun her around, his face radiant with happiness. "I couldn't agree more." As they continued to dance, surrounded by the lights of the city that had witnessed both their deception and their redemption, Harrison and Simone knew that they had built something rare and precious. A love that was stronger because it had been tested, more beautiful because it had been hard-won, more lasting because it was based on choice rather than convenience. 3 years later, Harrison stood in the nursery of their home, watching his wife rock their 6-month-old daughter to sleep. Emma Simone Blackstone had her mother's warm brown eyes and her father's stubborn determination, and she'd already managed to wrap both her parents completely around her tiny fingers. "She's finally asleep," Simone whispered, carefully placing Emma in her crib and tucking a soft blanket around her. Harrison wrapped his arms around Simone from behind, both of them gazing down at their sleeping daughter with the wonder of parents who still couldn't quite believe their good fortune. "Do you think she'll ask about our beginnings someday?" Simone asked softly. "About the contract marriage and all the complications?" Harrison considered the question seriously. "Probably. And when she does, we'll tell her the truth, that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start in the most unexpected ways. And that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're willing to fight to make them right," Simone added. "And that real love isn't about perfect people finding each other," Harrison continued. "It's about imperfect people choosing to build something perfect together." Simone leaned back against his chest, feeling the contentment that had become her constant companion over the past few years. Their merged companies were thriving. Their relationship had deepened into the kind of partnership that made them both better people, and their family was growing in ways that filled their hearts with joy. Richard Ashford had eventually reached out through intermediaries, requesting a chance to meet his granddaughter. After much discussion, Simone had agreed to supervised visits, not because she'd forgiven him completely, but because she'd learned that holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it. The relationship was still strained and would probably never be fully healed, but it was no longer characterized by active hostility. "I'm proud of you," Harrison said now, as if reading her thoughts, "for finding a way to forgive him, for giving Emma a chance to know her grandfather." "I didn't do it for him," Simone replied. "I did it for us, for our family. I wanted to make sure that anger and resentment wouldn't poison what we've built." Harrison pressed a kiss to her neck, marveling at the woman his wife had become. The fearful, guilt-ridden woman who'd tried to protect him by walking away had transformed into someone stronger, more confident, more at peace with herself and her past. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Emma's asleep, the house is quiet, and I have plans for us." Simone raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into the smile that still made Harrison's heart skip a beat. "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve showing my wife how grateful I am that she chose to fight for us instead of running away." Simone laughed, the sound light and free and full of happiness. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackstone." As they walked hand in hand toward their bedroom, past the photos that chronicled their journey from a fake marriage to a real partnership, from corporate rivals to devoted parents, Harrison reflected on how different his life had become from what he'd planned. He thought he wanted safety, predictability, relationships that could be controlled and managed like business deals. Instead, he'd found chaos, passion, and a love that had turned his carefully ordered world upside down in the most beautiful way possible. And he wouldn't change a single moment of it. "Harrison," Simone said as they reached their bedroom door, her voice taking on the husky tone that always made his pulse quicken. "Yes? I love our story," she said simply. "All of it. The lies, the truth, the fear, the courage, the pain, the joy. I love that we found each other in the most impossible circumstances and made it work anyway." Harrison pulled her into his arms, looking down at the woman who'd saved him in every way a person could be saved. "I love our story too," he said. "But mostly, I love that we're still writing it." "What do you think the next chapter will be?" Simone asked, her eyes sparkling with the curiosity that had first drawn him to her. "I don't know," Harrison admitted, his hands framing her face. "But whatever it is, we'll write it together." As Harrison kissed his wife with all the passion and tenderness of a man who'd learned that the best things in life were worth fighting for, he knew that their story would continue to be complicated, challenging, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Because that's what real love stories were, not fairy tales with neat endings, but ongoing adventures between two people who chose each other every single day. And Harrison and Simone would keep choosing each other through whatever came next for the rest of their lives. 10 years after their first meeting in that corporate conference room, Harrison and Simone Blackstone stood together at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Blackstone Ashford Community Center, a joint venture between their merged companies that would provide business training and support for underprivileged entrepreneurs. "Can you believe we're here?" Simone asked, watching their now 10-year-old daughter Emma help with the ceremonial first shovel of dirt, her face serious with the importance of her task. "Here, as in successful business partners who've created something meaningful together?" Harrison asked. "Or here as in standing next to your father at a public event without anyone throwing punches?" Simone laughed, glancing over at Richard Ashford, who was awkwardly trying to make conversation with some of their business associates. The relationship between father and daughter would never be easy or entirely trusting, but they'd found a way to coexist for Emma's sake and for the sake of the greater good their businesses could accomplish together. "Both?" Simone said, slipping her hand into Harrison's. "Though I have to admit, 5 years ago, I never would have imagined we'd be launching a charitable foundation with my father's company. 5 years ago, I never would have imagined I'd be willing to work with Richard Ashford on anything," Harrison replied. "But people change. Situations change. Love changes everything." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma ran over to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement and her hair escaping from its carefully styled braids. "Mom, Dad, did you see? Grandpa Richard taught me how to use the big shovel properly, and Mrs. Chang from the mayor's office said I'm a natural at groundbreaking ceremonies." Harrison and Simone exchanged amused glances. Emma had inherited her mother's diplomatic skills and her father's natural leadership abilities, along with a healthy dose of charm that was entirely her own. "We saw, sweetheart," Simone said, smoothing down Emma's wayward hair. "You did beautifully. Are you proud of me?" Emma asked, the question carrying the weight that only a 10-year-old could give to parental approval. "We're always proud of you," Harrison said, crouching down to Emma's level. "But especially today, because you helped us start something that's going to help a lot of people build better lives for themselves. Like you and Mom did? Emma asked with the directness that children specialized in. Harrison looked up at Simone, seeing his own emotion reflected in her eyes. Their daughter was growing up with the story of their complicated beginning, told in age-appropriate versions that emphasized love conquering obstacles and the importance of fighting for what mattered. Exactly like Mom and I did, Harrison said. Sometimes the best things in life require hard work and second chances. As the ceremony concluded and they mingled with the crowd of supporters, business associates, and community leaders, Harrison found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Their love story hadn't ended with their real wedding. It had continued to evolve and deepen with each challenge they'd faced together. There had been business setbacks that tested their partnership, family dynamics that challenged their patience, and the normal struggles of raising a child and building a life together that all couples faced. But through it all, they'd maintained the foundation of honesty and choice that had saved their relationship in the first place. "Penny for your thoughts," Simone said, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Just thinking about how we got here." Harrison replied, accepting the champagne and pulling her closer to his side. "Any regrets?" Simone asked, the question that had become their running joke over the years. "Only one," Harrison said, making Simone raise an eyebrow in surprise. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the best partnerships, in business and in life, aren't built on perfection. They're built on the willingness to keep choosing each other, even when it's difficult." Simone's smile was radiant. "I couldn't agree more." As they drove home that evening, Emma chattering in the back seat about all the important people she'd met and all the exciting plans for the community center, Harrison reached over to take Simone's hand. "I love you," he said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Simone replied, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for never giving up on us." "Thank you for choosing us over everything else," Harrison said, "even when it cost you everything." "It didn't cost me everything," Simone corrected. "It cost me things that didn't matter. What I gained, you, Emma, this life we've built, that's everything." That night, after Emma was tucked into bed with stories about brave princesses who made difficult choices and princes who learned to forgive, Harrison and Simone stood on their bedroom balcony looking out over the city lights. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently?" Simone asked, leaning against the railing. "Sometimes," Harrison admitted. "But then I remember that we needed the complication, the challenge. 2 people who'd spent their lives playing it safe would never have fought as hard for each other as we did." "You think we were meant to find each other exactly the way we did?" "I think," Harrison said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "that we were meant to find each other exactly the way we did. Messy, complicated, terrifying, and absolutely perfect." Simone leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. "I used to think love was supposed to be easy. And now? Now I know that easy love isn't real love. Real love is choosing someone every day, especially on the days when choosing them feels impossible." Harrison pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still amazed after all these years that this incredible woman had chosen him. "Mrs. Blackstone," he said, using the name that had started as a legal convenience and become the truest thing about her identity. "Mr. Blackstone," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "I choose you," Harrison said solemnly. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." "I choose you too," Simone whispered, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "For better, for worse, for always." As they kissed under the starlight, both of them knew that their love story would continue to evolve, would continue to face challenges and celebrate triumphs, would continue to prove that the most beautiful relationships weren't the ones that never faced difficulties. They were the ones that faced difficulties together and emerged stronger on the other side. Remember, my beautiful royal story family, that Harrison and Simone's journey teaches us something profound about the nature of true love. Their story wasn't destroyed by imperfection, it was refined by it. They didn't need perfect beginnings to create a perfect partnership. They just needed the courage to choose each other, again and again, even when choosing each other felt impossible. In a world that often tells us love should be easy, their story reminds us that the most meaningful connections are often the most challenging ones. The love that's worth having is the love that's worth fighting for. The love that sees you at your worst and still believes in your best. Harrison learned that trust isn't about never being betrayed. It's about choosing to rebuild when betrayal threatens to tear you apart. Simone learned that worthiness isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to let someone love you despite your imperfections. Together, they discovered that real partnership isn't about two perfect people coming together. It's about two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. So I ask you, my royal family, have you ever had to rebuild trust in a relationship? What made you choose to fight for love instead of walking away? Have you ever found that your greatest challenges led to your greatest growth? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love really can conquer all when two people are willing to do the work, please hit that like button and let me know. Your support means everything to me and helps these stories reach other beautiful souls who need to remember that their own love stories are worth fighting for. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next passionate journey drops tomorrow. Because here in our Royal Story family, we believe that everyone deserves a love story worth telling. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of what's possible when we refuse to give up on the people who matter most. Remember, beautiful souls, you are the kings and queens of your own stories. Choose love, choose growth, choose the courage to trust again. Choose to fight for the connections that make you better than you ever thought you could be. Until tomorrow, when we'll gather again around our virtual fireplace for another tale of hearts that refuse to surrender. Keep believing in the magic of transformation, the power of forgiveness, and the incredible strength that comes from loving someone enough to become the best version of yourself. Sweet dreams, my royal family. May your own love stories be filled with the kind of passion, courage, and devotion that turns ordinary moments into extraordinary memories. And remember, the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people. They're about persistent people who choose each other every single day. Until tomorrow, keep your hearts open to the impossible becoming inevitable.